And good evening, everyone. Nice to see you once again. Thank you very much for choosing to spend a portion of your evening with me. If you are new to our Bhagavad-gita Satsang, welcome. My name is Hari-kirtana, and our purpose is to develop a deeper and more meaningful relationship with the teachings of the Bhagavad-gita. Our purpose is also to make sure that the camera is level. So thank you very much for your participation this evening. I hope you are all well. All right, thank you. We'll do just a little bit of housekeeping. The first matter is just to make sure that all of you can hear me. There's a little raise your hand icon that you should see. And if you would be kind enough to hit the raise your hand icon. Yes, thank you very much. Now I know that I'm being heard. In the rest of our housekeeping department, you can adjust your audio settings. So hopefully I am loud enough. If I'm not, let me know, and I'll speak louder. Odds are better that you'll want to turn me down. You have viewing options as well in case you want to turn me off, but hopefully that won't be the case, and you can adjust your viewing options. You do not have to be concerned with your own microphone or video camera in your digital device because you can see and hear me, but I cannot see or hear you, but I can hear from you. So if one of you would be kind enough to type a question into the Q&A box, just to let me know that that is working as well. It can be a rhetorical question. It doesn't have to be a real question. We've already established that my favorite fruit is strawberries. Hi, Mara. Thank you very much for being here. And it is good to see you as well. All right. On with the show. Last week in chapter 5, we started chapter 5, and Arjuna still wasn't getting it. We talked about the integration of action and knowledge, renunciation and action, and analysis and practice. We covered verses 1 through 7, and we left off with something that I tossed into the Facebook group. And if you're new to the satsang, we have a Facebook discussion group just for subscribers. You will see the link to it in the newsletter I will send to you tomorrow with the links to the recordings of this class. And there was a little bit of discussion there. We left off with one who sees the unity of contemplative study and spiritual action sees things as they are. However, renunciation is difficult to attain if it is uncoupled from spiritual action, whereas the sage who is absorbed in spiritual action quickly attains the supreme destination. So this seems like a contradiction. Maybe it's a paradox. So the question I asked was, how can two things be the same, a unity, if one uncoupled from the other does not work, whereas the other will stand on its own? And there was some nice discussion about that. And I think one of the responses was pretty accurate, that actually spiritual action includes renunciation automatically, whereas the point Krishna is trying to make here is that renunciation by itself, without an accompanying spiritual action, is very, very difficult and not likely to work. And I'll give you an example of that as we go along this evening in the verses that we're going to cover. It's late August, and that means it's the start of allergy season. I noticed just the other day that I just started sneezing. My throat started doing what it does around this time of year. Anybody else have this same issue around this time of year? The yellow sneeze weeds, starts to get in your throat or anything like that? There's something else that I'm allergic to, apparently, besides just air at this time of year. And it's a particular phrase that we hear a lot in contemporary yoga. And we hear it from people who we look to as leaders, spiritual leaders within the modern yoga community. And the phrase is personal truth. And I bring it up because one of the other comments in the Facebook group was a quote that spoke to the idea that there's not a one-size-fits-all way of doing yoga, which I agree with. I believe the implication was that the choice between spiritual action and renunciation is up to the individual. What works for us? Some people are going to be naturally very renounced, some people not so much. Some people will be inclined to action, whereas some people will be inclined to, say, the pursuit of knowledge or meditation or mystic yoga or something like that. But the quote ended with the idea that everyone has to follow their personal truth. I'm not always sure what people mean when they say personal truth, but I know what it means to me, ironically. What it means to me is bending the spiritual teachings of yoga to justify our likes and dislikes, to conform the teachings of yoga to our obstacles, namely our attachments and aversions, as opposed to personal realization of an absolute truth, which is when we conform ourselves to the teachings of yoga and do our very best to meld ourselves in order to be transformed by the teachings of yoga, rather than have the teachings of yoga justify not changing, being perfect just the way we are. So I'd like to follow up on this either this evening if you have questions about it, or if you have an understanding of personal truth or what that means that's different from the definition I just offered to you. Because personal truth may mean something to you and something else to me, and your personal truth about the meaning of personal truth may be true for you, but how does that make my personal truth about what personal truth means true to me in any objective or valid sense? Feel free to comment on that if you feel so inspired, or go to the Facebook group and pick up the discussion there, which may be even more better, since that's where it started. Tonight's program, the art of letting go. As a yoga teacher, I find that I am often encouraging practitioners on the mat to let go. Feel where there's resistance in your body, breathe into that resistance, and just breathe the resistance. Just let that resistance go. Find something that's taken up residence in your body, and just let it go. We're going to talk about the art of letting go. going to talk about being the non-doer of activities, being like a lotus leaf. Sounds very attractive since lotus flowers are very beautiful. And being in a city with 9 gates. We're going to cover Bhagavad-gita chapter 5, text 8 through 13. So I'm going to read the translations all the way through and then come back and speak about each verse as is our usual habit. Now, just so you know, a message flashed on my screen moments ago telling me that for some reason my internet connection was not everything that it could be. And every so often, my internet connection will jump off of one Wi-Fi connection onto another. So if I disappear, stay tuned. I'll be right back. It's happened before, and if you just hang in there, then I'll be right back. All right, here we go with this week's verses. This is verses 8 and 9 together. Those who are acquainted with reality by virtue of a steady yoga practice think, I am not doing anything. While seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, walking, sleeping, breathing, talking, eliminating, accepting, even when blinking my eyes, it is only the senses that act in relationship to the objects of the senses. Just as water does not cling to a lotus leaf, misfortune does not cling to those who let go of attachments and offer their actions to the absolute reality. Abandoning attachment, the karma yogi acts with body, mind, intelligence, and even the senses solely for the sake of purification. Text 12, those who are linked in karma yoga, having renounced the fruits of their actions, attain lasting peace. Those who are unlinked, forsaking this practice, seek enjoyment from the fruits of their work and thus become entangled by selfish desires. Text 13. Mentally renouncing all actions, an embodied master of the senses lives happily within the city of 9 gates, neither acting nor causing actions to occur. So there's our collection of verses for this evening. And now we'll go back and look at them one at a time. So once again, verses 8 and 9, those who are acquainted with reality by virtue of a steady yoga practice. Now this by itself, I think, is very significant. There's an underlying assumption here. And as some of you know, I have spoken about why one should look for the underlying assumption, the unspoken assumption of a proposition or a question in order to decide whether or not the question or proposition itself is valid, if it's based on something reasonable or solid, or if you simply accept the basic premise. So the premise here, actually there are 2 things that are implied by this statement. One is that those who do not have a steady yoga practice are not acquainted with reality. This is our starting point. Arjuna is our role model, and Arjuna, at the beginning of the Bhagavad-gita, tells Krishna how he sees things. And Krishna replies to Arjuna, it sounds like you know what you're talking about, but you are not acquainted with reality. In the Bhagavad-gita is spoken to reacquaint Arjuna with reality, with a broader vision than the vision he has that has brought him to a condition of despondency. The Yoga Sutras, very, very similar. Patanjali tells us that the reason we want to still the fluctuations of the mind is so that we can see who we really are in our true nature. That is to say, to reacquaint ourselves with the reality of the true nature of our being. Otherwise, you may be in any one of these other states of mind. Unreality. So this is the first proposition, that those who are not engaged in the steady practice of yoga are not acquainted with reality. Whereas the second proposition, by virtue of a steady yoga practice, one becomes reacquainted with reality. Which is to say that one who is on the path of yoga may not be fully acquainted with reality, but has a better sense of reality than the non-practitioner. Feel free to share any thoughts you have on that. Meanwhile, those who are acquainted with reality by virtue of a steady yoga practice think, I am not doing anything, while seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, walking, sleeping, breathing, talking, eliminating, and accepting, even when blinking my eyes. It is only the senses that act in relationship to the objects of the senses. Earlier, we came across a verse where Krishna tells Arjuna that one who is bewildered by the influence of false ego thinks, I am the doer of activities. I'm the one who's making things happen. The word for false ego in Sanskrit is ahankara, a compound word consisting of aham, I, kara, doer, the same root as karma, action. So ahankara means I am the one who is acting. I am causing action. And this is understood to be illusion. Krishna tells Arjuna what's really happening is that the three qualities of material nature are interacting with each other. And these three qualities are the primary colors of the whole painting of the material world. The quality of goodness, the quality of passion, and the quality of ignorance, heaviness, darkness. All three of these combine to create every hue, tint, and shade of every person, place, and thing in the world. It is the essential building blocks that make the material world what it is. And they are animated by the presence of consciousness. And consciousness, identifying with those different qualities, thinks, I'm the one who's making things happen. When in actuality, the Atma, the soul proper, does nothing, is not actually involved in anything other than having a desire. That desire is pretty much the full extent of our free will in terms of acting. I desire to walk across the room, and then I get up and walk across the room, and someone can explain the mechanics of how the machine of the body can do that. But what no one has really adequately explained is the connection between consciousness and the conscious desire to do such a thing, and the fact that it happens, that our will is transformed into the action itself. So someone who is acquainted with reality understands that the senses are interacting with sense objects, and that those senses made of material elements interacting with sense objects made of material elements are actually interactions of the modes of material nature. This includes our psychology. Here, the list has physical activities, seeing, hearing, touching, etc. So all of the examples are what would be called gross matter. And the reservoir of the senses that are engaged with these sense objects is the mind. So the psychology of the mind is also considered to be in this realm of matter, and therefore composed of these three qualities of material nature. So this is kind of scary, because that means that thinking also comes under the category of the interactions of the modes. Consider your response. What do you think about something? I've been engaged in a conversation with one of my teachers about politics. And generally, my teacher tends to be disengaged. He's a monk, so he's certainly not actively engaged in any kind of political stuff. But he does have opinions about what kind of society is most conducive for advancement in spiritual knowledge and the dissemination of spiritual knowledge. So we've been talking about this, and I bring it up because each of us in our discussion was willing to admit that we may be susceptible to bending spiritual understanding in the direction of our conditioning. I happen to take a pretty progressive liberal position in most political things. And I have to be sure, am I aligning my political opinions with the teachings of yoga? Or am I aligning the teachings of yoga with my political positions? Something to consider. I would like to think that I am aligning political considerations with the values of yoga, as opposed to interpreting the values of yoga according to the way I am influenced by the modes of material nature in order to justify a, wait for it, personal truth. As we know, I'm allergic to personal truths. I like personal realizations, but personal truth, it makes me feel like hair is growing on my tongue. Same thing that happens when I eat a kiwi. Let's go to the next verse. And the next verse is the one that we are going to chant together. This is verse number 10. I will chant one line, give you time to chant that line back. And the line, due to the diacritical marks that provide pronunciation cues, the dot under a vowel, like an N, means that you are closing the back of your tongue to the roof of your mouth and not just your lips up front. The bar over the A is an open ah sound. No bar open, which is like sound. Under the H at the end of a word, at the end of a line, indicates that you're going to echo the vowel back. And I think that covers it for this verse. So here we go. I chant, you chant back. Brahmanyadhaya karmani sangam tyaktva karoti yaha lipyate sapapena padma patram ivam bhasa. Very good. You are expert Sanskrit chanters. The translation: just as water does not cling to a lotus leaf, misfortune does not cling to those who let go of attachments and offer their actions to the absolute reality. Have you ever seen a lotus flower growing in a muddy pool, the pad of leaves right in the water, and yet the water never clings. It seems to not ever get wet, just rolls right off. This is a very nice metaphor for being in the world but not of the world, of moving through the world without being affected by the world. And this is what we aspire for. Not that we want to jump out of the pond, but that we can stay in the pond, but from a position where stuff doesn't stick to us. That is to say, our actions do not generate a binding reaction, which is the overarching topic of this section of the Bhagavad-gita, the Karma Yoga section. The word misfortune is a translation of papena. So papena and its variations appear several times in the Bhagavad-gita, often translated as sin or sinful. So here, misfortune. In other words, bad karmic reactions. Actions that are in disharmony with cosmic order and therefore generate a disharmonious reaction. So here Krishna is saying that misfortune, bad karma, doesn't cling to those who let go of their attachments and offer their actions to the absolute reality. Which is to say that obviously you're not generating bad karma if you let go of attachments and offer your actions to the absolute reality. And the absolute reality, by the way, is Brahman, up the very first word of the verse. However, we have a stock of karma. We come into the world with baggage. We're not a blank slate. Things don't start when we arrive in this particular body, in this particular life. The reason we are born in a particular situation, to a particular set of parents, in a particular place at a particular time, with a particular disposition, is because of past karma. Friends of mine just had a baby, and the two mothers-in-law got together to compare notes. What were their son and daughter respectively like when they were a little baby, and then what is their granddaughter like, and how does she compare? And in this way they tried to figure out, was this brand new baby more like the mother or the father? which attributes of which were there. Well, those attributes aren't created at the time of birth, according to yoga philosophy. One takes birth to a particular set of parents in order to fulfill a particular destiny, to be a particular way. And what happens to the bad karma we may be dragging around with us is that it slides off, just like water slides off of a lotus leaf, when we do two things: let go of our attachments and offer our actions to the absolute reality, the highest truth. In this case, Brahman, meaning the ground of being, or may also indicate that person who is the ultimate recipient of all sacrifices. Krishna has already identified himself as being ultimately that person, although sometimes he will refer to the personification of the absolute truth as Vishnu, as he did earlier in the 3rd chapter. So it's a two-part process. Oftentimes in our modern yoga community, we only hear about the first part: just let go of your attachments, act without attachment. And as we discussed in our review of the verses from last week, just doing that is a very, very challenging thing. The second part is essential. You also have to offer your actions to the absolute reality. One of the questions we don't ask ourselves as we move through the world, that we could ask ourselves a little more often than we do, is, whose world is this anyway? Is it mine to enjoy? Or does it belong to somebody else? The Upanishads, the Mandukya Upanishad, the Mundaka Upanishad, the Isha Upanishad, all indicate actually that the world is not ours to do with as we please, to organize for ourselves to enjoy, nor is this a case of an absentee landlord. Each of these different Vedic texts indicate that Brahman, is the natural source, the natural proprietor of the world on account of being the source of the world. The first mantra of the Isha Upanishad very specifically says that everything is related to the supreme being. It just so happens I've got a copy of the Isha Upanishad right here. I'm going to share that mantra with you. Ishavasyam idam sarvam yatkincha jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bhunjita magridha kasya svidhanam. Which means everything animate or inanimate that is within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. Remember, this is the Isha Upanishad, as in Ishvara. The word Ishvara is often translated as the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for oneself, which are set aside as one's quota, and one should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. So this plays to the niyama of contentment and the yama of not stealing. If we think that the source of the world is the actual proprietor of the world, then when we over-endeavor to acquire that which just does not come naturally to us by virtue of our karma, then we're stealing. Basically, we're thieves. The idea that we can exploit Mother Earth, the resources of the earth, for the sake of our enjoyment. This is stealing. This is one of the reasons why we get such a bad karmic reaction on a global scale to man-made environmental catastrophes or violations, let's say, of Mother Earth. And then contentment. You know, we accept what comes our way and we're satisfied with that. We don't try to get more. Greedlessness, not being greedy, is also one of these principles, the ethical guidelines. So spiritual action is based on knowledge of relationships. Knowledge of relationships, Sambandha Gyan, that's the first category of Vedic knowledge. And if we understand that the relationship between us and the world is that we are not the proprietor of the world, and if we understand the relationship between the world and the creator of the world, which is not us, that the creator of the world, the source of the world, is the proprietor of the world, then it changes our relationship with the world, and also changes our attitude about what the world is for, who the world is for. And I think, for myself at least, it makes it a lot easier to offer the fruits of one's actions. If any of you are experiencing internet issues, please type something into the Q&A box. I've probably slipped off onto a different provider. I have two providers, and sometimes the signal will just jump from one to the other, and one is less stable than the other. But if I switch back, there may be an interruption in my broadcast to you, so I'm not inclined to monkey with it. But if my signal to you is being disrupted, then let me know, and I'll just go ahead and do that. I'll just go ahead and switch that over. So please give me an indication in the Q&A box as to whether or not the signal is being interrupted. Meanwhile, we'll go on to our next verse, which is verse number 11. Abandoning attachment, the karma yogi acts with body, mind, intelligence, and even the senses solely for the sake of purification. So here Krishna is saying the only reason to do something is if it's purifying for you. And if it's not, don't do it. We accept everything that is favorable to the purification of the mind, intelligence, ego, heart. And we reject all of the things that are not specifically going to be purifying. And that's really, really challenging for me, especially at this time of year as we head into the Labor Day weekend, because once we get past Labor Day weekend, preseason is over and the regular season begins. I watch football. It's terrible, I know, but on Sundays I take a knee, and this is what I do to relax. I think watching men run around slamming into each other is relaxing. Go figure. It's the modes of material nature. They made me this way. It's not my fault. Don't blame me. It's just the modes interacting with one another. Anyway, once I get the cadence of a game, I might try to spiritualize it by, first of all, turning the sound off, because the sound vibration is just horrible. And then I'll read a book. I'll read the Upanishad and glance over at the game, and then read the Upanishad and glance over at the game. And anyway, you know, if we analyze all the things we do in our lives and then say, is this purifying or not? It turns out there's probably a lot that's not. And figuring out how to turn that which is not so purifying into that which is one of the tricks of yoga. It's like yoga judo. And there are a remarkably high number of things that we can do that with. Football is probably not one of them. Although, from the standpoint of two teams assembled on a battlefield, you could use it as a metaphor for the situation in the Bhagavad-gita. I've tried to do that. So here's some of the logic behind this idea of only doing things that are purifying for the mind, the senses, etc. First of all, one who gets to the point where that's all they do, that's a person who is moving through the world like a lotus, who is liberated, who's not picking up any more karma, and is working entirely for the benefit of others. So a person who is acting as a servant of the highest truth, with body, mind, intelligence, and words, is a liberated person, even though they are still walking the earth. And the actions they perform, even though they appear to be material, are actually spiritual. And the only reason for acting beyond their own purification is to assist others in their own spiritual advancement. So here's the other part of the logic here. It's understood in yoga philosophy, and in the philosophy that's presented, at least in the Bhagavad-gita, that we are all a part of one absolute reality. And that one absolute reality, in its ultimate personal form, is Krishna himself. And therefore, we are all part of Krishna. Our senses are Krishna's senses. And this is how I know that Krishna likes Ethiopian food, because I like Ethiopian food, and I'm part of Krishna, therefore Krishna likes Ethiopian food. Yeah. Anyway, because we are part of Krishna, we can think what is pleasing to Krishna's senses. These senses actually belong to him the same way that the whole world belongs to the absolute truth. Everything in the world, therefore, is also something that belongs to the absolute truth. And I'm in the world, and my senses are in the world, and therefore my senses, which I think are mine, are actually Krishna's senses. And therefore I can spiritualize these senses, or these senses can regain their true spiritual nature when I engage these senses in activities that are pleasing to Krishna. So that's another way to look at why watching football is probably not very purifying. I doubt very much that Krishna has much interest. Sue, you have a question. And what I would like you to do, since it's a reasonably involved question, is send that question to me via email, because as soon as I close up the webinar, that question will disappear from the Q&A box that I can see here. So please send it to me, and better yet, I would love it if you pop that question up onto the Facebook group. Because that way, not only can I see it, but the rest of our satsang can also see it, and they may have some comments on it as well. I would love to throw that up for discussion. Thank you very much. All right, verse number 12. Those who are linked in karma yoga, having renounced the fruits of their actions, attain lasting peace. Those who are unlinked, forsaking this practice, seek enjoyment from the fruits of their work and thus become entangled by selfish desires. So the first item is linked or unlinked. Yukta is the specific word that is used in the verse. Sue, I assume you copied and pasted that so that right after the webinar I can fulfill your desire. So the question now is yukta, linked. Who or what is one linked to through the practice of karma yoga? So it's interesting phrasing. Yukta comes from the same root word as yoga, which is yuj, to link, to connect, to yoke together. So yukta means to be connected through yoga, because the word yoga also appears in this verse. So the question now is, well, linked to who or to what? The answer here is one who is linked to the absolute in one of three aspects. Brahman, the impersonal aspect, the ground of being, the spiritual energy that pervades everything and of which everything is ultimately made. Param Atma, the supreme Atma within the heart of all individual Atmas. And Bhagavan, the supreme person, in God in personal form. So this is who we are linked to, what we are linked to. And by this action of karma yoga, we find peace. And not just peace, but lasting peace, sustainable peace. Because we are connected to that which is spiritual. That which is spiritual has no beginning and no end. And the happiness derived from being transcendentally situated is a categorically different kind of happiness from the pleasure derived from the senses. Whereas one who is pursuing the pleasures of the senses, trying to enjoy the results of their work, finds themselves in a state of lasting anxiety about getting what they want, keeping what they want, etc. And the constant endeavor that is involved in acquiring and keeping what we want. Which brings us to the next verse, which implies the problem with trying to enjoy the results of one's work. And that verse, number 13, is mentally renouncing all actions. So this is interesting. It's not just a matter of not pursuing it, but mentally renouncing all actions. Because if externally we stop pursuing the things that we think we want to enjoy, but we're still meditating on it, we're still thinking, I wish I had that. I'd be really happy if I had that. Then we're just kidding ourselves. And in an earlier verse, Krishna characterized such a person as a charlatan, pretender, poser. So it's not just a matter of an external renunciation, but that renunciation also has to be an internal renunciation, mentally renouncing all actions as well as physically. An embodied master of the senses, so one who has control over their senses rather than someone who is controlled by their senses, lives happily within the city of 9 gates. So this is a metaphor for the material body. The 9 gates are 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, a mouth, genitals, and anus. And the problem with having one of these machines, the problem with living in a city of 9 gates, is that eventually the city crumbles. It's very hard to maintain a city. I don't know if you've ever tried to maintain a city, but it's a lot of work. There are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of elements that you have to take care of. There are a lot of departments that need to function properly. And then inevitably, the thing falls apart. It's impossible to continue to enjoy through the senses of this body. Not only that, but the senses that were once very strong and capable of high levels of enjoyment in our youth eventually betray us and become sources of misery when the body breaks down. Therefore, one who gives up this quixotic pursuit of material happiness actually becomes peaceful and can live in the body without being disturbed by the body itself. You can be peaceful within the body from a spiritual standpoint, even when the matter that makes up the body starts to give you a hard time. And one so situated neither acts nor causes actions to occur. This reflects back to, first, the idea that one who is situated in karma yoga, which is to say, renunciation of action informed by knowledge that allows one to act from a spiritual platform and thus not generate a reaction. This goes back to the gnarly topic of understanding what is action, what is improper action, and what is inaction. So neither acting. Sounds contradictory, but it's a paradox, because we've been speaking about someone who moves through the world and yet somehow or other is not said to be acting or causing actions to occur, which is to say, acting without generating a reaction. There's no karma involved in the actions of such a person. And by virtue of the fact that no karma, bad or good, really is generated, there is no anxiety about the reactions to work. All right. Which takes us to the end of this cluster of verses. The art of letting go, being the non-doer of activities, being like a lotus leaf, being peaceful within the city of 9 gates. And if you have any questions, this would be a great time. Oh, yeah, I can do this. All right, let's see if that works. Any questions, comments about what we have discussed here this evening? Please go ahead and pop your questions or comments into the Q&A box. And yeah, this will be fun. If you have questions after the fact, or if you are watching this after the fact, please send those questions to me, Hari at Hari-kirtana.com, and or post your questions and comments to the Facebook group, Bhagavad-gita Online Satsang on Facebook. And if you are not currently a member of that group, then go ahead and request membership. I'm going to head to that page right after we're done here, and I will unlock the door and let everybody in. Next week, we will continue with chapter 5 and the results of letting go or not. Earlier, Krishna spoke about how he is not affected by any of the actions he performs. An interesting corollary to how Ishvara is described in the Yoga Sutras as being karma-free, not affected by any action or he's not predisposed to act in any particular way. An interesting idea that the Supreme Person is someone who does something. Here, Krishna is going to talk about how the actions of others don't affect him either. So, completely independent. One of the 6 opulences is complete independence. We'll also talk about ignorance and knowledge in relationship to action. And one of my favorite verses in the Gita, and a very, very important verse, seeing with equal vision. One of the results of karma yoga is the ability to see with equal vision. And we'll talk about what that means and how that manifests, how one experiences that. We'll be covering verses 14 through 19 in the 5th chapter. Mara, you're very welcome. My pleasure. Thank you all very, very much for spending this portion of your evening with me. It is always a great, great pleasure for me to spend this time with you, and I'm honored by the pleasure of your company. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a wonderful weekend. By the way, Labor Day just happens to coincide, this Monday just happens to coincide with the celebration of Janmashtami, which is the celebration of the appearance of Krishna in this world. There is an elaborate astrological calculation involved in determining when Krishna's appearance is understood to have taken place. And it moves around on the calendar because it's calculated on a lunar rather than solar calendar. It just happens to be this Monday. So I hope if you are inclined to celebrate Krishna's appearance, that you have a very wonderful time doing so. And a wonderful weekend, whatever your plans may be. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you all very, very much. Take care.